Okay, good morning. Good morning. We are on the bottom of Kuf Yud Amud Aleph by the two dots of Rishmal Amar. A little bit of a hard Gemara, not too hard, a little bit hard, and ultimately you're going to be learning some very, very relevant halachos about Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur that falls out on Shabbos. So one of the things that we're going to discuss is about preparing at the end of Yom Tiv for Matzah Yom Tiv, right? So typically we don't do hachana from one day to the next. Is there a permissibility, right? We're going to break our fast. Are you allowed to prepare? And so we'll see some interesting svaras that are discussed and ultimately how we conclude. So Rabbi Shmuel Omer Mekapan, right? So if we recall, we said Rabbi Shmuel said that you're allowed to fold from Yom Kippur to Shabbos. Sorry. Yeah, basically Rabbi Shmuel holds, right, we're discussing whether or not a person whether the sanctity of Shabbos and Yom Kippur are the same or different. Rabbi Kiva said there, and the way that this was expressed was about burning of the fats from one day to the next, right? At the end of, when you do the Ola offerings on Shabbos or on any day, there's leftover fats, and the question is, can you burn them at the next day? So depending on how you perceive the sanctity of the day, it would be appropriate or inappropriate to burn the fats on the next day. Rabbi Kiva said, you could only burn the fats on the day of. You can't go from Shabbos to Yom Kippur to Shabbos, whereas Rabbi Yishmael said you could burn the leftover fats of Shabbos onto Yom Kippur because he holds that Shabbos is more holy than Yom Kippur, and therefore it's not inappropriate to burn the leftover fats from Shabbos onto Yom Kippur. Okay? So Gemara is going to show the scriptural source and understand the conceptual source for these halachas. So Tana Rabbanan, Ola Shabbos v'Shabbat. The pasuk says that the Ola offering of each Shabbos is done on its own Shabbos. So Li made al chelvei Shabbos shekrevim Yom Kippurim. This teaches us the fats of Shabbos may be offered on Yom Kippur. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that if Shabbos falls out, if Yom Kippur falls out on Motzei Shabbos, you'd be allowed to bring the leftover Shabbos fats on Yom Kippur, on Motzei Shabbos. It says the Gemara, Yachal Afshal Yom Kippur Shabbos. Maybe you'll also be able to bring the leftover of Yom Kippur, if Yom Kippur falls out on Friday, on Motzei Shabbos, on Friday night. Tamalomar Bishabbato limits it and says that it only can be brought on a Shabbos, telling me that I can't bring the leftover from Yom Kippur onto Shabbos. Okay, Div Rabbi Shmuel. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. And so again, for him, you're allowed to bring leftover from Shabbos on Yom Kippur, but leftover Yom Kippur you cannot bring on Shabbos, and this is based on the limitation of Bishabbato. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Ola Shabbos Bishabbato. From the pasuk we learn, Limed al Chalvei Shabbos shekrevim b'Yom Tov. You're allowed to bring the Shabbos offerings on Yom Tov, meaning if Yom Tov falls out on Motzei Shabbos, you could bring leftover offerings of Shabbos on Motzei Shabbos. Yachal af Yom Kippurim. Let's say if Yom Kippur falls out on Motzei Shabbos, you'd be allowed to bring the Shabbos offerings. Tamalomar Bishabbato. Bishabbato is a limit, saying you could only bring the Shabbos offerings on Shabbos. You can't bring the leftover Shabbos offerings on Yom Kippur. Now the Gemara is going to explain what the basis of their interpretation is. Because Tim Salomar, okay, so you could conclude the following: the Divrei Bishmal, according to Bishmal, Nedarim Unedavos Cravim B'Yom Tov. A person is allowed to bring their personal vowed, like a person makes a vow they're going to bring a certain offering, you're allowed to bring it on a regular Yom Tov, okay? So, fine. That is a matter of debate. And Mishmal holds you are allowed to bring your personal vowed offerings and donated offerings on a Yom Tov, okay? So, and if that's the case, then the Gemara assumes that I'm certainly allowed to bring Shabbos leftovers on Yom Tov. In as much as I'm able to bring my Nedarim and Nedavos on Yom Tov, I'm certainly allowed to bring my already sacrificed Shabbos offerings that are still not burnt on Yom Tov as well, meaning when Yom Tov falls out on Motzei Shabbos, and therefore Yom Kippurim, and therefore now that you have a pasuk telling me that there's more permissibility, it's coming to include that I could bring the leftover Shabbos offerings on Motzei Shabbos. Okay, and that's the view of Rabbi Yishmael. So the starting point is that Nedarim and Nedavos are allowed to be brought on Yom Tov itself, and therefore you have an extra pasuk to teach me. Therefore I have, and therefore once that's the case, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that I'm allowed to bring leftover Shabbos offerings on Yom Tov. It's going to be the same level of gravity, and therefore when I have an extra pasuk, it's coming to teach me that I'm allowed to bring Shabbos offerings on Yom Kippur. That's the view of Rabbi Shmuel. However, the Rabbi Kiva, Nedarim and Nedavos ain't krivim Yom Tov. Rabbi Kiva holds I'm not allowed to bring Nedarim and Nedavos on Yom Tov, okay? I cannot bring my own personal things on Yom Tov. V'chi itzrich kra, and therefore when there is permissibility in the pasuk, what's it coming to allow? Lemishra b'Yom Tov, to allow a person to bring the leftover Shabbos offerings on Motzei Shabbos, which is Yom Tov, right? Because according to him, I don't already know that I could bring that, and therefore I have nothing left to permit bringing Shabbos offerings onto Yom Kippur, and that's why they each come to their conclusions. Okay, Rav Zera says the following. Ki havina bevavel havi amri. When I was in Bavel, Okay, he used to learn Torah there. He lived in Eretz Yisrael. He used to learn Bavel. They used to say Hadatanya that it was taught in a brisa. Yom Kippurim shechalios erev Shabbos. That if Yom Kippur falls out on Friday, lo hayu token, they would not blow the shofar. Now, typically in the Jewish cities, they would blow the shofar on erev Shabbos. Okay, they would still have a remnant of this. If you're in a certain place in Yerushalayim, you could hear they play music or they have a siren as a way of reminding a person that Shabbos they used to blow the shofar. But if Yom Kippur fell on Friday, they would not blow the shofar. Uvmatzei Shabbos, and if it fell on Yom Kippur, lo hayim avdilin. They would not make havdalah. And of course, they wouldn't make real havdalah because you can't drink wine or grape juice on Yom Kippur. What they're referring to is making havdalah in Mariv, right? In Atzachon and Tanu, they would not add. In Atzachonin, they would not add Atzachon and Tanu. Okay, I used to think Divrei Kolmi that this ruling that you don't have these distinctions made on erev Shabbos when erev Shabbos is also Friday is Yom Kippur, nor do you make havdalah on Matzei Yom Kippur. I thought that was the opinion of everyone. Okay, I thought there's no difference. This is Rav Yishmael, Rav Kiva, same thing. Okay, Kisalikin al-Hassam. When I then ended up in Eretz Yisrael, I traveled to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkechite liYehuda Breid Rav Shimon ben Pazi Diyas v'Kamar. We're on Kuf Yudal Mabez 114b1. Encountered Yehuda the son of Rav Shimon ben Pazi, who was sitting and saying, Rabbi Akiva, that the author of this brisa, who says we do not blow the shofar and we do not make havdalah, that is Rabbi Akiva. Why? It's Rabbi Shmuel, because if it's Rabbi Shmuel, Akiva the Amar Chelve Shabbos Krevim Yom Kippurim, since Rabbi Shmuel says that the leftover fats of Shabbos are able to be brought on Matzei Shabbos, which is Yom Kippur, Liska, you should blow, Ki Hechid Lahavi Yade, the Chelve Shabbos Krevim Yom Kippurim, you should blow, so that you know that the fats of Shabbos are brought on Yom Kippur, but that, and although it doesn't say this, and you will therefore also know that the fats of Yom Kippur will not be brought on Shabbos. In other words, according to Rabbi Yishmael, since there is a distinction between Yom Kippur and Shabbos, right? According to him, there is a distinction between Yom Kippur and, according to Rabbi Kiva, everything is the same. Everything is the same, and therefore there's no need you're not concerned that you're going to mix up. And therefore you know on a year that Yom Kippur falls out on Matzei Shabbos, you will not be bringing the leftover Shabbos stuff on Yom Kippur, right? According to Rabbi Kiva. And therefore, similarly, you're not going to go ahead and on a year that Yom Kippur falls out on Friday, you will not go ahead and bring the Yom Kippur stuff on Shabbos either, because you'll see they're completely distinct, okay? And therefore, according to him, there's no need to blow the shofar because there's no reminders needed. There's no, right? What's the purpose of a shofar? To tell you that the kedushos are separate. But you know, you're not going to make any mistakes. You see, just as much as I'm not doing if I don't do on Shabbos and Yom Kippur, I'm certainly not going to do on Yom Kippur onto Matzei Shabbos, right? If I can't bring the Shabbos, which you would have thought is more holy than Yom Kippur, you're not going to bring the leftover fats from Shabbos onto Yom Kippur. I'm certainly not going to bring the leftover Yom Kippur fats on Shabbos. No need to blow shofar, no need to make a reminder. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, since I do bring the leftover Shabbos offerings on Yom Kippur, when it's Matzei Shabbos, right? I therefore may go ahead and say, oh, it's one and the same. I'm going to confuse it. And say when Yom Kippur falls out on Friday, I'll bring the leftover fats of Yom Kippur on Shabbos, which Rabbi Shmuel does not allow, and therefore you should blow the shofar in order to tell me, no. There is a distinction between these 2 days. The shofar says there's a difference. Now we're about to start something more sanctified, more holy, and therefore you should blow the shofar in order to distinguish and say, don't bring, even though on 1 year you are bringing the Shabbos offerings on Matzei Shabbos, which is Yom Kippur, don't bring the Yom Kippur offerings on Shabbos. How do I know? Because I'm going to blow a shofar. Yeah? Making sense? Okay. So where it says Vamina la'ana, he says therefore, therefore this view which says don't blow the shofar is according to Rabbi Kiva. According to Rabbi Shmuel, there is a need to do so. Vamina la'ana, and Rav Zera said to him when he heard this, he said, you don't have to do so. Why? Kohanim zrizin hain. The Kohanim are conscientious of their responsibilities. In other words, they know that the Kohanim don't need extra reminders. The Kohanim are like diligent people. They're not going to make any mistakes. Okay? Now the Gemara questions this. Okay? Therefore he says, that means that there's no need to blow a shofar. In other words, what would be the purpose of blowing a shofar? To tell them, don't bring Yom Kippur stuff on Matzei Yom Kippur, which is Friday night, because halachically, Yom Kippur is less holy than Shabbos. Don't think, right? You don't have to do so. Why? Because the Kohanim were very strict, very knowledgeable, and very, very careful, and therefore no one's going to make this mistake. Okay? Now the Gemara questions this. Amrlei Mark Shisha Breder of Chislo Rabashi. Mi amrin kohanim zuzin. Is it so that the kohanim are so conscientious they don't need any response or any reminders? Vatznana was taught in a Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah said right in Masechah Sukkah that there are 21 shofar blasts that were sounded every day in the Beis Hamikdash. Every day in the Beis Hamikdash, 21 times the shofar was blown. Okay, and then on Friday another 6 blasts were added on Erev Shabbos, where we spoke about that stone that was found, right, way back when, an archaeological dig. There's a place in the Beis Hamikdash where they would blow the shofar, and it was done 6 extra times on Friday. Why? Shalosh lahavta l'amim malacha, 3 to stop the people from work. Shalosh lahavta b'kodesh l'chol, and 3 extra ones to say, and now it's time to stop working. Okay? Now, this was blown where? In the Beis Hamikdash. So presumably, who is it meant for? The Kohanim, right? So why are you telling me Kohanim don't need reminders and Kohanim are so diligent? You see, the blowing of the shofar took place in the Beis HaMikdash in order to remind Kohanim. So the Gemara says, K'damar Abaye, l'shor Amud b'Yerushalayim. Okay, he says in another context that although something was done in the Beis HaMikdash, it was really done for everyone else. Hachinami, here too, we could take that same principle. Even though something's being done in the Beis HaMikdash, l'shor Amud b'Yerushalayim, it was being blown. The shofar was being blown for the rest of the people in Yerushalayim, but it wasn't being done for the Kohanim because indeed the Kohanim are diligent. Okay, we're at 114b2. Okay, says the Gemara. Now the Gemara asks why the shofar is not sounded when Yom Kippur falls out on Friday. Veliska, there's another reason you should blow the shofar. Ki hechi deledi deshrei ben kivas yarak min mincha ulamala. Okay, you should blow the shofar so that you know that Yom Kippur is more lenient than Shabbos. Okay, and that you should know that you'd be allowed to trim vegetables at the end, towards the end of Yom Kippur, in order to be able to make your vegetable soup on Matzah Yom Kippur. What this means is as follows. Yom Kippur, Matzah Yom Kippur, you're going to be eating, right? Now, normally we have a halacha, you're not allowed to do hachana from Shabbos or Yom Tov to the next day, right? Even one day of Rosh Hashanah to the next day, you can't do hachana. The one exception is, from Yom Tov, second day of Yom Tov, you're allowed to do hachana for Shabbos if you did Erev Tov Shilin. But typically, you don't go from Yom Tov to Chol. However, there is a halacha that you're allowed to prepare towards the end of Yom Kippur, you're allowed to prepare, not do malacha, but you're allowed to do some prep. In other words, you can't do like full-fledged malacha, but you're allowed to do some prep so that you can eat right away on Matzah Yom Tov, or at least we'll see. Sorry for everyone, it's going to be rejected. But there is at least theoretically there is the permissibility of doing some preparation. And by the way, why would it be allowed? I think Gemara says that the Mefarshim explain the reason it's allowed is not for the reason that you think, hey, I'm going to be so hungry. It's on the contrary, that when you're making food, it actually makes you more hungry. And since Yom Tov Yom Kippur is a time that there's supposed to be inu nefesh, supposed to be suffering, so therefore it was permitted, because although you're doing achana, you're also making your life a little bit more miserable because now you're engaged in food, and therefore is allowed. Okay, but the point is that maybe you should blow the shofar because at the end of the day, Yom Kippur has more leniencies. Although in most respects, Shabbos and Yom Kippur are identical. In this respect, because on Shabbos you're not allowed to prepare towards the end of Shabbos for after Shabbos, but Yom Kippur you would be allowed to prepare. Okay, and therefore you should blow the shofar in order to show us that blow the shofar when Yom Kippur falls out on Friday, blow the shofar in order to tell you that Yom Kippur is different than Shabbos. Now, what's interesting is that on the years that Yom Kippur actually falls out on Friday, you would actually not be allowed to do so. Why? Because they trim the vegetables so that they could cook the vegetables. Now, you're not going to start cooking the vegetables until after Yom Kippur. But after Yom Kippur, in a year that Yom Kippur falls out on Friday, is Shabbos. You're not going to actually cook the vegetables. So what we're saying is blow the shofar like you do every Friday, even when Yom Kippur falls out on Friday, so that you will know that in general Yom Kippur is different than Shabbos in the sense that you're allowed to do hachana. You're allowed to do some level of prep, even though that year, when you're blowing the shofar, you actually would not be preparing the vegetables because it would not be helpful because by the time Yom Kippur is over, it's Shabbos. Got it? Okay. So where it says no, Amar Rav Yosef Fishein Dochin Shvos Lahatir. It doesn't. You don't do so because we don't waive a rabbinical prohibition, i.e., blowing the shofar. Shofar is a rabbinical prohibition in order to give people notification of the permissibility of a certain act. In other words, we would not allow you to blow the shofar, which ultimately is normally rabbinically prohibited, in order to tell you something is permitted. Maybe we'd waive a shvus, we'd waive a rabbinic law in order to teach you that something is forbidden. But to go ahead and waive a rabbinic law, tell you something is permitted, no, we're not going to do that. So that's one answer. Okay, Rav Shisha, B'reid, Rav Idi Amar, Shvus Krovei Tiru, Shvus Rechoka Tiru. He says, no, really, we would waive a rabbinic prohibition for the sake of notifying people of something permissible, but that's only if it's permissible immediately. In this particular case, what are you suggesting we do? You're suggesting we blow the shofar on Friday of Yom Kippur in order to know that on another year, when Yom Kippur is a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, that you're going to be allowed to prepare at the end of the day. But on this year, you're not actually able to prepare. So we're not going to blow the shofar on this year so that you'll know on another year. No, we're not going to go that far. Granted, there's value in blowing the shofar, and we'd waive a rabbinic prohibition of blowing a shofar, but not to tell you about something on another year. Now, the Gemara questions this. Ask the Gemara, Shabbos, Krova Hitiru. Is that so that they permitted a rabbinic prohibition for the sake of telling you something about which is immediately permissible? If that's not, it was taught in a Mishnah. Yom Tov Shechol Yoser Shabbos. If Yom Tov falls out on Friday, token, we blow the shofar, v'lo mavdilin, and we do not recite Havdalah, right? So if Yom Tov falls out on Erev Shabbos, we do blow the shofar on Yom Tov, okay, which is Friday. Token, right? We blow v'lo mavdilin, but we don't say Havdalah at the end of Yom Tov, which goes into Shabbos, right? If Yom Tov falls out, if Yom Tov is Friday and Shabbos is Friday night, in Mariv we do not say Havdalah, we do not say the blessing of Havdalah to distinguish between Yom Tov and Shabbos because we're actually going higher, not lower. Matzei Shabbos. If Yom Tov falls out on Matzei Shabbos, Mavdilin, we do say Havdalah because from going to Shabbos to Yom Tov is going down. V'lo token, but we do not blow the shofar. Okay, we do not blow the shofar. Ask the Gemara, Vamai, why don't we blow the shofar? Okay, there'd be value in blowing the shofar on Matzei Shabbos, towards the end of Shabbos. Why? To let a person know that it's permitted to slaughter immediately after Shabbos ends, right? You're allowed to do shechita you're allowed to slaughter animals after Shabbos on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, clearly you see that we don't blow shofars on Shabbos or Yom Tov to let a person know about something which was permitted, even if it's an immediate permissibility. So the Gemara says, you're right. Ella, we're on 114b3. Ella mechavarta Rav Yosef. We're going back to the first answer, which is we do not waive rabbinic prohibitions to teach people permissibility. Okay, fine. Now once we talked about trimming of vegetables, the Gemara is going to ask, what about a year like this year? Are you allowed to trim vegetables to prepare for after Yom Kippur, when Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbos? What's the question? So according to the Gemara basically said that I'm allowed to start preparing vegetables, and it doesn't just mean vegetables. I'm allowed to start prepping any of the food that I'm going to make on the end of Yom Kippur. Why? In order to eat it after Yom Kippur. But the whole premise of the permissibility wasn't because, we feel bad for you that you're hungry. On the contrary, we think that's going to make your life more miserable, right? So why would Shabbos be different? Not supposed to be miserable. So maybe when Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbos, we have this weird balancing act. On the one hand, we don't wear shoes and we fast because we have to have distress, but maybe we're not going to add extra distress. It's one thing what the Torah says, but don't go extra, right? Okay, I can't wash my hands, I can't, I can't eat, but I'm not going to go ahead and add extra things. That's the Gemara's question. So Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav Huna, V'amri la, Amar Rav Abba, Amar Rav Huna, Yom HaKippurim Shcholios b'Shabbos. When Kippur falls out on Shabbos, Asur b'Knivas Yarak. It is forbidden to trim the vegetables. For this reason, like Tzvi said, we don't want to go and add extra burdens, extra stress. Amar Rav Mana, Tana, was taught in a brisa. Where do you see that you're not allowed to prepare the vegetables? By cutting them. Tamalomar Shabbason. The pasuk says it is a day of rest. Shvos, completely rest. Now the Gemara, the brisa is a little bit. The pasuk is a little bit vague. So the Gemara asks, Lamai, which cutting are we referring to? Maybe we're talking about cutting from the ground. Right? Maybe that's what we're referring to. And saying the pasuk saying you can't cut vegetables from the ground. The Gemara says that can't be vaksiv. It's written lo sasa kol malacha. You can't do any work on Yom Kippur. So of course we're not talking about cutting from the ground. That's already obvious. Elalav aknivas yarak. Rather, must be talking about the trimming already harvested vegetables. You're not doing a malacha, but still you can't do hachana on Shabbos and day of Yom Kippur, which falls on Shabbos. You can't do so. Shmamina. So it seemed to be a source from this brisa. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan. A dissenting view. Yom Kippur Mishcholios b'Shabbos mutter b'knivas yarak. You're allowed to trim the vegetables on the end, towards the end of the day. Meisvei, however, bring a question from the brisa we just quoted. The brisa says you are not allowed to cut the vegetables. Tamalomer Shabbason, learn from the word Shabbason, and which teaches us Shavos, rest completely from work. And Lamai, the Gemara asks, it's just all a paraphrase when we a repeat of what we saw before. If you want to tell me that's talking about malacha mamish, really talking about biblically forbidden activity, vaksiv, it says lo sasik malacha. You can't do any work. It must be that what this brisa is saying is that you can't trim, and therefore, how do you come along and say you are allowed to trim these vegetables on the end of Shabbos which falls out on Yom Kippur. So lo, the Gemara says, la'olam l'melacha. Really, the Bryce is teaching us cutting the vegetables from the ground. And it's teaching us something which is already prohibited from lo sask melacha, a negative prohibition. V'lav roleha ba'aseh v'lo and the word Shabboson is coming to teach you, not only am I going to be in violation of a negative prohibition of not doing work on Yom Kippur, but rather there's two things now. I'm going to be in violation of the negative prohibition and a positive prohibition. Okay, the Gemara brings a source for another support for Rav Yochanan's position. Tanya Kavasid Rav Yochanan, Yom Kippur Mishchol Yos B'Shabbos. Yom Kippur that falls out on Shabbos. Next page, we're on Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph. Mutter B'Knivas Yarak. You are allowed to go ahead and trim vegetables. And as we said, it's not just trimming vegetables, but rather including that Mefatzin Be'egozim. You're allowed to start cracking the nuts. Umefarkisim Be'rimonim. You're allowed to break open the pomegranates. Mina Mincha Ula Mala, from Mincha and on. Mipnei Agmas Nefesh, because ultimately causes emotional distress. So again, so far it sounds like. So this is very good. So a person go ahead on Yom Kippur. Did you know this? Did you know this? That you could go towards the end of Yom Kippur from Mincha time and on. You're allowed to go ahead and start preparing for Matzeh Yom Kippur, and even when Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbos. Okay, the reason you didn't know this is because of the next line. Okay, no, sorry. Today we're just making sure everyone's away. Kedvei Rav Yehuda mekanvei Baruch Rava. So the members of the household of Rav Yehuda would trim cabbage on Yom Kippur for consumption after Yom Kippur, based on this Gemara. Again, it's allowed. Why? Because it increases our agmas nefesh. Okay, kevan dechazda v'kam mecharfe. However, Rabba saw that people were going ahead and abusing this. And even before Mincha time, they would spend their whole day, making cinnamon buns and whatever. Well, again, not doing malacha. That's a joke. But using, prep, any form of prep, and they would spend a good chunk of Yom Kippur preparing things. Amar Lahu, he came along and he said, Asa igartz marava. This is fascinating. He said, a letter came from the west. Okay, Mishmeid Rav Yochanan, in the name of Rav Yochanan, who always told us this was permitted, to Aster, and he said he changed his mind. Rav Yochanan, who we are relying on, he actually said you're not allowed to prepare whatsoever on Yom Kippur for Matzah Yom Kippur. He essentially lied to them, but he did so because he recognized that they were abusing this halacha. They were preparing from Mincha and on, and he wanted to make sure that that doesn't happen, and therefore he said, the Rav Yochanan said it's Aser, even though it wasn't, but that is the way we rule. And therefore, even though at one point it was permitted, at one point there was an allowance to go ahead and prepare at the ends of Yom Kippur for Matzeh Yom Kippur, and even on the end of Shabbos for Matzeh Shabbos Yom Kippur, but because people were abusing this, as we can imagine people would do, people are getting so hungry, people are perhaps bored, therefore it was ultimately instituted that it would be prohibited. We have just finished the parak. We're going to start the new volume, Think It's V, and the Alice family for buying them. We're going to start the final volume of Masech Shabbos, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.